Hello, it's Scott Manley here, and it's May the 4th. Be with you. As a big Star Wars fan, I had to get that in there. It is time for another batch of Deep Space updates, and we have some news hot off the presses, or hot off the Twitter spaces, so to speak. But we are going to start with the launches from the last couple of weeks. Going back to the 20th of April, 420, we did not have a Starship launch. No, that was a year ago. But we did have a Long March 2D launching out of Chichang in China, carrying a Yaogan 42 military reconnaissance satellite. 23rd of April, Falcon 9 carrying 23 Starlink satellites out of Florida. 23rd also saw Rocket Lab launching a mission called The Beginning of the Swarm, carrying a spacecraft called Neon Sat-1 for Korea. This is going to be the first of 10 Earth observation satellites. These are 100 kilogram small satellites providing 1 meter resolution imagery in 500 kilometer orbits. But after dumping off that satellite, the spacecraft kick stage, the Photon, transferred itself to a higher orbit, to 1,000 kilometer orbit, and deployed a spacecraft called ACS-3. This is a solar sail satellite for NASA. So this is a 12U CubeSat, and it has 4 7-meter long carbon fiber composite booms carrying out a solar sail. So this provides 80 square meters of polymer sail with aluminium on one side, chrome on the other for like reflectivity and thermal management. The booms are a bit like, they're very similar to the type of booms we see on the Rosa solar panels. So they are like flat pieces of carbon fiber tape that when they get extruded, they roll into a rod shape. And this means they can roll it in like a tape measure and roll it all out. Now, they have not yet deployed this sail, but the real aim of this mission is to verify this deployment procedure. I'm not sure what the plans is, how far it's expected to go, but people are paying attention to it, and we hope to see a successful sail deployment in the next few days. Also, we got a really cool image of the stage, the kick stage, from Electron second stage. That's kind of cool to see the stages in orbit. Moving forward, 25th of April, Shenzhou 18 launched on a Long March 2FG. So this is, of course, 3 new Chinese astronauts headed to their space station. Yi Guangfu, who is on his second mission, he first flew on Shenzhou 13. Li Gong and Li Guansu. So they're going to be there for 6 months. They dock to the station. They have taken command. They transfer, control of the station through a key transfer ceremony, which is largely symbolic, but hey, tradition and all that. And the previous crew of Shenzhou 17, Tang Hongbo, Tang Shangji, and Jiang Jinlin, they have all landed on April 30th, and their landing was a whole lot smoother and less rolly than the previous landing of Shenzhou 16. 28th of April, Falcon 9 launched a pair of satellites for Europe, the Galileo navigation satellites. Now, these are going to mid-altitude orbits, right? That's around 22,000 kilometers, halfway between geostationary and low Earth orbit. These are very similar to the US GPS system or Russian GLONASS. The satellites, I believe, are called Patrick and Juliana. And originally, this mission was planned to launch on a Soyuz ST-B, right, out of Kourou, but obviously that was scrapped for political reasons. Then they moved it over to an Ariane 6, and that plan was dropped because it was taking its damn time. And of course, it finally launched on SpaceX Falcon 9, except that in their press release about the successful launch, the European Space Program Group or whatever failed to mention this. And indeed, when some journalists asked them what launch vehicle it was launched on, the statement that they were given, again, sort of failed to mention that this was launched on an American Falcon 9 rocket. Very funny and amusing. I just find it kind of funny that they're embarrassed. Because, yes, it is kind of embarrassing that Europe has basically launched all its big launch vehicles for now. But yeah, also, notably, this was used Falcon 9 booster 1060, and this began its career launching GPS-3 satellites, and it was expended on this flight, Flight 20, and, understandable because these are 2 satellites that had to go into a fairly high orbit. And Notably, during the launch stream, if you look carefully, you can see one of the controllers saluting the booster as it signs off for the last time. Good job. 28th of April, Falcon 9, Starlink carrying another 23 satellites out of Florida. 2nd of May, a Falcon 9 out of Vandenberg carrying a pair of satellites into sun-synchronous orbits. These are the Maxar Legion Worldview satellites. They're basically, Earth imaging satellites with 30 centimeter resolution. This is a very low mass payload for the Falcon 9, which is why they were able to perform a return to launch site landing and have the stubby nozzle on the second stage, where they don't make the really long nozzle and save a bit of money on that. So they have planned to launch 6 of these satellites, and presumably they could launch all 6 on a Falcon 9 if mass to orbit was important, but they all have to go to slightly different orbital planes, so they can only launch 2 at a time. And if you look carefully in the background to some of my videos, you'll see that I do actually have a Lego model of the Legion Worldview satellite. This was sent to me by one of the design people, PR people at Maxar. And unfortunately, apparently they get laid off soon after making this thing, but it's very cool to have a model of these satellites going forward. Moving onwards, 3rd of May, we have another Falcon 9 out of Cape Canaveral launching 23 Starlink satellites. And just a few hours ago, May the 4th, China launched Chang'e 6 on a Long March 5. This is a spacecraft which is going to land on the far side of the moon and return a sample to the surface of the Earth. This is going to be the first landing and recovery or return from the far side of the moon. It's going to take a couple of months, and because it's operating on the far side of the moon, it's going to need the Qichao relay satellite, which was recently launched. So they're landing in a location called Apollo Basin, and I don't know if that is a nod to the fact that there seems to be something of a space race developing for returning humans to the surface of the moon. China think that they are going to be on schedule to do this in 2030, and while NASA has currently got 2026 as their landing date, I won't be surprised if that gets delayed for all sorts of reasons. Also, this mission carried a ride-along satellite called iCube-Q. It's a 7-kilogram cube satellite built by Pakistan, and it is their first lunar mission. It's just going to be doing some basic science around the moon. So yeah, the hot news from earlier today, as I said, I just got out of the press conference that they had on X. SpaceX revealed their EVA spacesuit for the Polaris Dawn mission. And this is has new capabilities over the standard SpaceX EVA suit. So the EVA suit is designed to be used inside the spacecraft. If there was a pressure failure, it would keep the crew alive and it wouldn't let them do a whole bunch more. An EVA suit is supposed to let them step outside. So yeah, what do we do for this? Well, when you have a pressure suit, it tends to pressurize into, a configuration that keeps them rigid. It's very hard to move the arms because that requires bending and changing the volume, and the pressure causes this to resist. So they've added rotating bearings at the shoulder. So there's this rotary bearing that allows them to move the arm up and down. There is a rotating cuff joint that has been added to it. The helmet is upgraded. It now includes a heads-up display so they can see suit parameters and things like that. There's going to be a camera for a couple of the suits so that they can actually see, show what they are sending back to Earth. So there's a few other interesting things that this is going to operate on a pure oxygen environment at 5.1 psi, so that's roughly 1/3 of an atmosphere. And when you're going from 1 atmosphere down to 1/3 of an atmosphere, you have to worry about the bends, right? Depressurization problems. The protocol is going to be, they're going to launch into space, initially starting at 1 atmosphere pressure, and as they spend time in orbit, they're going to slowly drop the pressure down, increase the proportion of oxygen until they are close to the EVA conditions. Because you have 4 people in this spacecraft, and there's no airlock, so everybody is going to have to be part of this EVA. Everybody is going to need to be depressurized and cleaned out. So they're just going to do this for the entire spacecraft. There's a bunch of other things, like they're not going to have the cupola this time. They're going to have a structure with supports out there, which they call the Skywalker. I guess that's why they did this announcement on May the 4th. Yeah, so there's a few other things that they're going to have temperature controls on their umbilical. This is not like a NASA spacesuit. So we have the suits that are being developed by Collins and David Clark, all that stuff. This is not going to be at that level. It's not going to let them walk. There is no articulation in those legs. It's probably going to have a much higher rate of gas loss because they still have that big entry zipper along the legs. These are still going to have to be custom made for each individual astronaut rather than built out of a set of common components for all the astronauts. But yeah, SpaceX is now looking at the next launch with Dragon and a crew on board as being Polaris Dawn this summer. So yeah, still a lot of questions, but it's definitely getting closer to this, and we're definitely looking forward to the first of the 3 Polaris Dawn missions. Okay, moving onwards. Going back to mid-April, the FAA have basically set a rule in place that they will not authorize launch licenses for vehicles which are designed to return to Earth unless they have already figured out the landing license. And this will avoid the problem that happened last year with Varda Space that launched assuming that they would get a return to Earth authorized, and in fact, it spent 6 months in orbit before they could actually make that happen. In Scotland, we've had some development. Yes, Orbex has raised about $20 million to help them continue building their Prime rocket. And while we haven't seen a production version of the Prime rocket, there is another rocket company, Rocket Factory Augsburg from Germany. They have shipped their RFA-1 rocket to first stage to Saxevord Spaceport in Shetland, north of Scotland. They're going to be performing engine firing tests up there. So we're going to be seeing rocket engines firing in Scotland, on a rocket stage firing in Scotland, moving towards a launch sometime in the future. Yes, it's real. Launches from Scotland are going to be a thing. NASA announced that the Dragonfly mission is officially moving forwards. This is a mission to Titan, which will send... It's more or less a large drone. Instead of driving across the surface, this thing will charge up its batteries using a radioisotope thermal generator and be able to fly from one spot to another, land and do some science on the surface before moving on somewhere else. Titan is, of course, the moon with the thickest atmosphere. It has pretty low gravity. And I've been looking forward to this mission, but I will still have to look forward because it's going to launch in 2028 with a landing something like 2036 or something like that. Yes, I will be an older man, but I will still be excited. I remember hearing about this and immediately building it in Kerbal Space Program when the story happened. But yeah, big part of the delay in approving this is that as they studied it and did their various design reviews, the cost ended up getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's now looking like the whole mission is going to cost something like $3.3 billion. But as far as I'm concerned, that is well spent on a very unique, groundbreaking mission that is going to really push the limits of engineering and science in a very good way. Of course, in the last few weeks, we also saw Bill Nelson testifying before Congress about NASA's funding, and it was just frustrating to watch this because you have all these politicians saying, "Why aren't you spending money on this great project that benefits my district?" To which Bill says, "Well, you guys are the ones cutting the funding. Why don't you give us more money?" Yeah, this just kept on going back and forth. But Bill is really... One thing he was really stressing is that they need to start funding either the ISS deorbit vehicle or they need to come up with some other way to continue supporting the ISS beyond that. This is a big deal. You can't have the ISS just falling back to Earth. After all, the current plan... is built around using Soyuz spacecraft, and we all know that is our Progress spacecraft, and that may not be available after, by the time it's ready to deorbit the space station. Another important sort of NASA meeting in the last few days has been like the Advisory Council Human Exploration meeting, where we finally got to see some statements about Starship flight's propellant transfer test, where the Deputy Associate Administrator went on the record and said that on Flight 3 they did in fact do the intertank transfer of cryogens and it was successful by all accounts. That is NASA's words. So for all the people that have been saying it didn't work, they couldn't prove it worked, well, NASA has gone on the record and says that it did work. Having said that, they are still analysing the data and it is a long way to go from that simple intratank test to actually docking starships in orbit and transferring them, and we are still a long way of knowing just how many launches will be needed to get Starship to the surface of the moon and back to space with humans on board. In Europe, SES is going to acquire a rival satellite operator, Intelsat, for a $3.1 billion price tag. That is a deal that would bring together two of the biggest GEO satellite communications operators. These are the ones that provide satellite internet in the days before, of course, Starlink started taking over the world. So these two companies are merging together to defend themselves against the threat of Starlink. Together they control over 100 GEO satellites and a few like mid-altitude satellites, the O3b constellation that has been started to build out. We've also seen, like in recent years, similar mergers between like Viasat that acquired Inmarsat and Eutelsat acquired OneWeb. So, we've seen a lot of this going on, and this is just the next step in this very big set of corporate acquisitions in the space communications market. In Japan, Astros Scale has announced that they're going to go public on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and around the same time, they also showed off this really awesome image of this H-2A upper stage, which their spacecraft, ADRAS, has been rendezvousing with and performing proximity operations. Now, this is part of a debris removal test program. At this time, they're not going to actually rendezvous and deorbit this thing. What they've really been doing is just demonstrating the capability to operate close to this spacecraft and remain close to this spacecraft without actually damaging it. Elsewhere, by the way, Terran Orbital, a few weeks ago, if you remember, they were up for being acquired by Lockheed Martin, which had been a major investor in Terran Orbital. Well, in the last few days, that deal has been cancelled, and Terran Orbital's stock has dropped precipitously. It's not clear what's going to happen next, whether they are going to continue operations, whether they can get money from elsewhere, but that is a developing story at this time. We don't really know what's going to happen to Terran Orbital. And yeah, the other really big space deal story, there's been a lot of this in the last few weeks, is Kerbal Space Program 2. They are owned by Private Division, right? They're being developed by Intercept Studios, and Private Division just had a bit of a cost-cutting exercise because they acquired Gearbox Software. They're running low on cash, so they're closing down a bunch of studios, firing a bunch of people, and we don't know exactly what's going on with Kerbal Space Program 2. What we do know is that they had to notify local authorities that they are laying off 90 people in Seattle, and the only studio we know of in Seattle is Intercept Games, which are developing Kerbal Space Program 2, so putting two and two together, and the fact that a number of people known to work on the game are looking for new work, it doesn't look good. Let's just say that. Now, they've of course said, oh no, we're not going to cancel your early access game, but they haven't also said much else. And significantly, a few days before this announcement, there was an internal, there's a Kerbal Space Program coming soon article which showed some amazing volumetric clouds that developed by a guy called BlackRack, which has been doing an amazing job developing these for the original game as a mod via his Patreon, right? But it sounds like he's been laid off. So yeah, we don't know if we'll see those in the game. We don't know what's going on. And yeah, if you want to buy a game, buy the original right now. Moving onwards, let's get away from this and talk about Orion. So the NASA Office of Inspector General, they published their report on the Orion program, and they found a few problems. But sure, the main problem with Orion is it's just been taking too long. But the real thing that made people stop and look was the state of the heat shield. Because we'd seen that the heat shield was a bit rough. We've now seen some real close-ups of things like the bolts that join it to the second stage, to the service module. Those were pretty badly beat up. They melted a lot more than they should have been. There's a lot of chunks missing out of the shield, and all the same, the scientists have said, look, if this was with humans, it would have been fine and it wouldn't worry us. But what really worries them is they haven't truly understand what is causing all these bits of the shield to fall off rather than just ablate away gently and protect the spacecraft. Not understanding the physics means that they can't for sure know that it's going to be good in the future. And this is going to be important for Artemis 2, which is going to have people on it, and it's going to be coming back from the moon at higher velocities. They use this Avcoat material, which is the same stuff that was used on the Apollo program, but a lot has changed in the intervening years, and they're now going to have to re-understand all this stuff. Yeah, another thing that came out, by the way, was that the damage to the launch platform was a bit more than expected, $25 million worth, including the fact that the doors were blown off the elevator. And the engineers who had studied this or whatever had thought that these doors were blast doors that should have protected against the powerful blast of the rockets, when in fact they were made of fiberglass. They blew right off and the elevators got damaged, and one of them was out of commission for 4 months. So yeah, they're going to have to fix that. And finally, after what seems like an incredible odyssey, we have Boeing Starliner actually going to the space station in the next couple of days. Boeing originally, I think, said that they would be ready in 2015. That's only 9 years late. Maybe I'm misquoting them on this, but it has taken an incredibly long time. And obviously SpaceX soundly beat them to it. But it will be nice to have some redundancy on this. We're going to see Sunita Williams, Butch Wilmore launching. They're going to go to the International Space Station. They're going to hang out for a week or so and then come home, land on land in the Utah test range. So there's a chance that we actually see this on the West Coast. If you get high enough, if you get clear line of sight, you might be able to see this. But I just want to see this happen. And Boeing could use a bit of a win, even although I think they're now potentially losing money on this whole deal. But for me, there was one thing that stood out that has me finally rooting for them, and that is they published this photo of the astronauts training in the simulator in all their space gear, and that included their headsets, their David Clark headsets. Now, David Clark headset is what I use because when I was buying an aviation headset, I knew that David Clark also made spacesuits, so I was like, oh, I'm totally going to get that. Now I'm seeing this logo and this colour on astronauts. I am super proud to be wearing this in the cockpit. So I really hope this mission goes off as planned and that we finally have some redundancy in the human spaceflight program in the US. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.